Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending this information session, which is specifically targeted towards manufacturers and small business and the like. But if you're not from that industry or sector, you're of course welcome to hear all about Churchill Fellowship because they can be on literally any topic. My name's Adam Davey. I'm CEO of the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. We're based in Canberra, our nation's capital, and Ngunnawal country. And I'm going to begin this session by giving an overview of what Churchill Fellowships are all about, how you apply and the sorts of things we're looking for. And tonight you're going to hear from two really interesting and excellent Churchill Fellows, Ian Henderson and Joanne Lane. And so please, if I bore you too much, hang around for them, it'll be worth it. I do want to acknowledge our First Nations people and pay respects to traditional custodians of this land. I welcome all Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people who have tuned in. We did have a specific session focused on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander applicants, which was hosted by our Indigenous Churchill Fellows Network earlier this week. And I just want to mention that because we have quite a strong cohort. I think around 60 fellowships have been awarded to Indigenous Australians, and by and large, they're very keen to provide advice and assistance to people applying. A little bit of housekeeping. You can submit your questions at any time via the chat function. If you kind of miss out because you didn't think of something in time, that's fine. You can contact us later on via the website, or you can call our office during business hours. You're likely to get me or anyone else on the team here. We're a small team of about eight people here. We're contemplating maybe doing some Facebook Live or similar sessions over the next couple of weeks as well. So look, plenty of opportunities if you don't think of a question tonight. Hopefully we answer most of your questions. We'll answer them all at the end, including questions for Ian or Joanne, so that way we can get through the presentations and then have a conversation around your questions. I do also want to acknowledge that, it's been a really difficult time over the last couple of years, at the very least because of COVID, and that's created disruption on a whole range of fronts. Of course, it disrupted international travel. I am pleased to say that we've had Churchill Fellows leave Australia and come back already this year. So that's pretty exciting to see the fellowship travel start up again. And if you're attending this session, I really hope that you're taking a positive mindset and a hopeful outlook for the future, because we certainly are. So to get into the presentation, I think it's important to understand a little bit of history about the Trust. And it's common for me to be asked the question, where does the money come from for Churchill Fellowships? And there's a really interesting story behind this. You can read a lot about Sir Winston Churchill. In fact, my son has just done an assignment at school about Sir Winston Churchill's speeches. So look, there's probably more written about Sir Winston Churchill than anyone else, I suspect. But when he resigned as British Prime Minister in 1955, he was 80 years of age. He'd actually served under 5 reigning monarchs and survived 3 wars. He'd been a writer, an historian, a journalist, a painter, an adventurer. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1953. So, there was a widespread desire to honour Sir Winston Churchill and to capture the essence of his public service, his inspiration, his intellect, and even his humour for generations to come. Now, look, he wasn't perfect, and we acknowledge that, and you can read some really interesting essays that we had commissioned on our website that explore Sir Winston Churchill through a contemporary lens. And I think, though, it's safe to say that he was someone who readily believed that anything was possible if you put your mind to it, and that the greatest figures in history were those who made a contribution to public service and to their fellow countrymen. And that kind of goes to the heart of what Churchill Fellowships are about. When the Prime Minister of Australia at the time, Sir Robert Menzies, announced Sir Winston's death in 1965, in January, he simultaneously announced a national door knock appeal, and that was held on the 28th of February 1965. Over 220,000 Australians, supported by the Return Services League, participated in this door knock appeal, and combined with Australians' generosity and business generosity and government contributions, around £2.2 million, so it was around sort of $4 million mark back in 1965 was raised, and that became the funding for the Churchill Trust and to award Churchill Fellowships. And over time, that money, our corpus has grown through careful investment and through bequests and donations, and we're now able to award around 100 fellowships a year. And we also have sponsors, which I'll talk about later, who help us award that number. So please do go to our website and do some research about the trust. It's really interesting, and it gives you a sense of what it's all about. Another thing people ask is, what is a Churchill Fellow? What do they look like? Who gets them? And I think, it's difficult to boil it down to one thing, but Churchill Fellows are the types of people that just are passionate about something, about an issue, about a skill, about a topic, about a field. They're committed to this issue, and they want to learn as much as they can about it and gain knowledge that they can share so that others in their communities will benefit in some way. So, I'm not saying they're all entirely selfless people. There's many personal benefits that you can get from becoming a Churchill Fellow in terms of growth and stature and all those sorts of things. But absolutely, Churchill Fellows are the kinds of people that want the community to benefit. So hopefully that's quite possibly you. So about Churchill Fellowships themselves, I think it's important to stress that they're a unique and prestigious opportunity. They're open to Australians from all walks of life. And Churchill Fellowships really do open doors to people and organisations who otherwise you might not be able to get an audience with. They're not an academic scholarship, and I do point that out because despite the fact that many people have attended uni, many people have not attended a university. You don't have to have finished year 10 to qualify for applying for a Churchill Fellowship. So, it's not about your academic prowess, and it's not a funding grant. So it's quite different to a funding grant where, you have to quit every cent and send back any loose change you don't spend. It's an empowering opportunity. We cost out your fellowship and give you the funds to go overseas and do the project that you said you'd do, and you book your travel and you book your accommodation and you sort that out. And it's up to you how you do that, and you can cut your cloth how you see fit. So it is quite empowering. There's a lot of trust involved in that. We do trust our Churchill Fellows to do the right thing. So a Churchill Fellowship, it doesn't need to comprise formal research. So by that, what I mean is you can go overseas to meet with people or organisations to learn new skills. You could undertake a course. You could build networks. You can observe best practice. You can also undertake structured, interviews and things. That's how you operate, and that's your jam. That's fine. But you can also use a Churchill Fellowship as a practical learning experience as well. It is for overseas travel that has to be taken between 4 and 8 weeks in one continuous journey. And I've got some changes, recent changes that I'll mention shortly as well. We've awarded, nearly 4,500 Churchill Fellowships since 1965. And each year, as I said before, we do aim to award around 100 or so. So Churchill Fellows, they travel the globe on the widest range of topics and the widest depth of topics, and they bring back to this country to share information, networks, projects, products, ideas, and innovation, all designed to help make this country stronger. To be eligible, you must be an Australian citizen, and as of this year, you can be a permanent resident. So that's a recent change we've made to expand the opportunity a little bit further. You do have to be 18 years of age by the closing date, which is the 28th of April, in order to be eligible. You need to be able to travel overseas. That's essential. And so we have had some questions. Do I need to have been vaccinated for COVID? Well, we don't set that requirement. That's not a requirement for a Churchill Fellowship, but it's currently a requirement to travel overseas. So if you can't meet that requirement, that's up to you how you're going to manage that. But I think you need to keep that in mind. If you're applying for a Churchill Fellowship to travel overseas, you need to be willing to comply with all the different things you need to comply with, visas, etc., to travel. If you have a disability, for example, we can provide you with support, and that could include assisting you with a carer accompanying you on your fellowship. Also, you might not be able to physically travel overseas, or you may have, really heavy caring responsibilities, and that prevents you from taking 4 to 8 weeks to travel overseas. In those cases, we're willing to allow virtual research to be undertaken. So that's something you could discuss directly with us, and that's something we're now able to offer. Also, for some people living in remote parts of Australia, so remote communities in Australia, we've responded to feedback that it can be, significantly challenging for domestic travel, let alone international travel, for a whole range of different reasons. If you fall into that space and you think there's a strong argument that domestic traveling within Australia and bringing that knowledge back to your remote community could be significantly beneficial, then talk to us, because that's something new that we're able to offer as well. It's important to note that a Churchill Fellowship, it's for individuals to apply for. So we do invariably get people ringing up and asking about applying as a team. You can't do a Churchill Fellowship as a team, so it's for an individual. So that's important to note. If you're undertaking a tertiary study, so you might be undertaking a master's or a PhD or something like that, that's okay, but you can't apply for a Churchill Fellowship to effectively become part of that tertiary study or to supplement that study, because a Churchill Fellowship is, and of itself, an important project, and it's something that we expect you to commit 100% of yourself to. So it can't form part of another study effort. We need you to be making the time and the brain space available to do that fellowship. So I think, in terms of personal eligibility, the thing I really want everyone to hear is that a Churchill Fellowship is an opportunity for a diverse range of people from all walks of life. And that for us is our mantra, and that's something that we do actually live, and we try to award fellowships to as broad a range of Australians as possible. So I hope that encourages anyone sitting there maybe feeling a bit like perhaps you're not, the right kind of person. Well, you never know, you may well be. In terms of your project, it's inherent that a Churchill Fellowship will benefit the Australian community through you coming back and sharing that knowledge or those skills in some way. And that doesn't have to mean like the entire Australian community. So it might be, a local community, it might be a particular sector or industry. So we're not expecting you to impact every Australian necessarily. So you do need to demonstrate that you've fully explored your topic in Australia. So you know what's happening in Australia on whatever your particular topic or proposed project topic is, and that you've identified that there are things happening overseas that are different to how they're being done in Australia, and you want to go and learn those things so you can work through and synthesize that and work out how could that be applied, or could that be applied in Australia to get different or better results than we're getting here. So you're going to have to convince us that it's worth sending you overseas, and that we're not better off letting you travel within Australia on your own steam first. So that's important. The project has to be self-contained. I mentioned it can't be part of a university study that you're doing, but also it can't be funded by another organisation. So we're not an optional travel budget that you can tap into to achieve a project that you're already doing as another organisation. I think, yes, there can be some synergies there, but a Churchill Fellowship is its own thing. It's not just a little add-on to something that you're doing. I think that's important to consider. We don't set limits on the topics or the issues, and I think it's pretty unique. If not, there might be some others, but there wouldn't be many opportunities like this in Australia, where we say to you, you choose the topic, convince us that it's relevant and going to benefit Australia, and we'll support it. That really does provide opportunities to people on a whole range of different things. So you do design, your own project. If you can think of a topic, then it could be something that gets up. We do offer some sponsored fellowships. So as I've said, we don't set topics, but we do have some fellowships that do have set topics. And so I'll try and make that make sense to you. So some people have left a bequest to the trust, and then we award a fellowship in their name. And they may have said that they want a fellowship on on a particular topic. So an example might be, there was a Churchill Fellow actually named Rodney Warmington, and when he passed away, his family, through his estate, left some money so that a Churchill Fellowship might be awarded every, I think it's every second year, the Rodney Warmington Churchill Fellowship on any topic that improves mobility, accessibility or livability in Australian environments or communities. We have an A.B. Jennings Fellowship that's specifically on topics related to domestic architecture, building and planning. So have a look on our website. When you fill out your application form, you'll be able to select 1 or 2 sponsored fellowships if you think your project topic aligns with that sponsored fellowship. Or some of them, the Peter Mitchell Fellowship is for people aged under 30s. You might say, yep, that's me. Now, importantly, don't waste too much time worrying about that, because you'll be considered for a Churchill Fellowship regardless of if you do tick a box or not tick a box for a sponsored fellowship. What that does, though, you ticking the box, helps us match you up to a sponsored fellowship. So if you don't, or you forget, or you're not sure, and we see your application and you get through the process and we're going to recommend you for a fellowship, and we say, wow, that's a really good match for the Auto Skills Australia Fellowship, which is focused on building industry experience and knowledge for the benefit of the Australian automotive sector. Well, we'll match you up to that anyway. So it's good to know that we have those opportunities out there, but don't spend too much time agonising over which one you select. So when you apply, you naturally now apply online. There's a button on the top of our website. I think it's called something obvious like apply, and click on that. And my advice to you is do that soon if you're thinking of applying. Applications close at 5 p.m. on the 28th of April, no extensions. So you've still got plenty of time, but the clock is ticking, and you're best off starting your application. You can save and go back to it many, many times as you like between now and the closing date. You'll see all the questions. You can start filling out your basic details, your personal information, and you can start formulating your answers. It's important to know that if you can't access the form, please contact us and we'll help you. So if you have a disability and say, I'm sorry, your form is not accessible for me, firstly, we apologise for that, but secondly, we'll find a solution for you. So we don't want anyone turned away because they can't fill out a form, because that's not what we're about. It's important to remember you're competing against other applicants. We typically get over 1,000 applications a year, and interestingly, we also get sort of around 1,800 or so applications started. So that tells us that quite a large number of people don't finish and submit their application. So the number one reason from surveys we've done is that people lose their nerve and think, oh, I don't think I'm good enough. So don't make that you. You are good enough. Put it in, back yourself. That's important. Or if you think the timing just isn't right, well, obviously that's fine. At least you've got a practice run in and you could apply again in the future when the time's right. But you are competing against other people. So you need to think about how you're going to convince the selectors to invest in you and also your project idea. You will need 2 references. So one reference who can talk about or vouch for you, your personal characteristics. You're the sort of person that's a go-getter, you get things done, and someone who's an authority in your topic or your field, someone that's got some credibility in relation to that topic. And it's really important to get in touch with those people soon if you're going to apply. The reason I say that is the number one reason for drama on the closing date is people call up and say, my referee hasn't submitted their reference. They're on leave, they're on a boat, wherever they are, I can't get hold of them. So don't make that you. Contact your referees early, make sure they're going to be available over the next few weeks. Explain to them what you're doing, and you'll be much happier at the end of it when they've submitted their reference. Churchill Fellows always tell us that process of working through the application really helps them refine their ideas and get it down. And you do need to be succinct. There's word limits. We're not expecting 1,000-word essays. You've got only a few hundred characters to spit out the objectives, why you want to do it, all those sorts of things. So that's very important. You'll find on our website, you can see the questions. They're available on there. They're in the applicant guide. But as I said, open up an application form, start it, and have a good look at it. Don't leave it to the last minute, because it certainly won't be your best application. And there's lots of people that are not leaving it to the last minute. So your itinerary, I think this is an area that some people potentially get confused about. So I just want to make this one really clear. What we want you to do in your application is identify which countries you want to travel to, which cities or towns you want to go to, and which people or organizations you want to meet with, how long you want to be there for. So it might be 5 days in New York meeting with, the company X. And then also, what do you want to do there? It might be undertake a course to learn how to build, whatever's widgets, or, observe their program on whatever, interview them, whatever that is you're going to do, just at a high level. This is where I want to go. This is who I want to see. This is what I want to do when I get there. This is how long I want to go there for. So that's important for two reasons. One, it really paints a picture of your project and what you want to do and what you're going to get out of it. And if you get an interview, that'll be, interrogated a bit further. But secondly, that allows us to also cost out your fellowships. We know how much your fellowship's going to cost, and we can make sure that, it's funded appropriately when it's approved. So that's really important. Limit your destinations to those places where you really need to go. There's no prizes for, putting 16 countries in a 4-week time slot and you'll just be run ragged. We want you to put enough, padding in your timeline that you'll be on your itinerary, so that if you get meetings that you didn't know you were going to get till you got there and people said, oh, you should go and meet with that person, tomorrow, you want to say, yeah, I can do that. Not, oh, no, I've got a flight in 10 minutes, I've got to go. You need to give yourself some time for those serendipitous meetings that happen. They do happen. Sometimes they're the best meetings you never knew you were going to have. Some time to be a tourist, to understand and experience the culture that you're in. So it gives you more of a sense of why they do things in the different countries, the way they do them. You need to make sure you have a weekend, you have breaks. We don't want you, running yourself into the ground. So this is something that we want you to get the most out of. So keep that in mind. Focus on where the places I really, really need to go, not how many countries can I get to in 2 or 3 weeks. So that's I think, quite practical advice for you there. Just be really specific and mindful. As you see on the slide here, you will be traveling from 1 February next year. I have to mention COVID. I did say at the start, it's pretty exciting. We've got fellows now traveling. There's still obviously ranges of uncertainty around COVID. There's global insecurity, Ukraine and Russia. I don't need to say more about that. It's not the best time, but it's possible, and people are traveling, and you won't be traveling to January next year. You'll have 12 months from the end of January 2023. You'll have 12 months in which to depart Australia, so plenty of time for things to change and for you to plan. We want to make sure you're safe, so we do have travel insurance. That's part of the fellowship. You'll only be allowed to travel to destinations that Smart Traveller through DFAT say are safe to travel to. So therefore, the question we get is, what happens if things change from when I apply to when I want to travel? Yes, you'll be able to modify your itinerary if countries are, locked down from COVID or unavailable for whatever reason. So there are some abilities or options to tweak it. Selection process. Look, in each state and territory, we have assessors, separate committees and panels with people from a range of different backgrounds, whether it's manufacturing, health, education, arts, whatever it might be. And they do the shortlisting and then interviews. In New South Wales and Victoria, there's actually 2 interviews. There's a first round interview, and then they cull it further and go to a second round because of the number of applications in those states. I think it's really important to understand that, we won't have necessarily someone from your particular expertise or specialist area in those panels. So don't use jargon. If you have to use jargon, explain what it means. Because in applications, it's full of jargon and people are scratching their heads, getting onto Google, and people do Google, they research these things. But if you make it really difficult for people to understand what your application is about, it's not going to be that compelling. So I would say, use plain English, be really clear, be really succinct, look forward to the opportunity to get an interview. Frame your application in a way that entices people to want to interview, to find out more about it. We've got the website selection process, including all the dates that are set for interviews and things on our website. So you can be bold, get your application in, block out those dates on the basis that you think you're going to get an interview, be organised. I recommend that. all the recommendations from those state and territory panels or committees go to our board, and the final decision will be mid-September. So look, the best tip in terms of your application, apart from not leaving to the last minute and contacting your referees early, would be to read and address the selection criteria, use as little jargon as possible, be clear, be succinct. So remember, it's a competitive process. They're hotly contested, but that's not a reason to be shy. That's probably a reason to put yourself forward, blow your trumpet for once. You'll be competing against everyone else who lodges an application. Most people do satisfy the criteria. So it's about making your application stand out, make it compelling. Is there a burning platform, a reason you need to go and address this issue now? This is something that needs to be addressed. Don't make it sound like something that could be done in 10 years' time, because there'll be a lot of other people that are saying, this is a hot issue, you need to deal with it right now. So think about how you're going to pitch your application. And on that note, in case you can't find it anywhere else, there's our office number. And as I said, we're in Canberra, so business hours, Canberra time. There's our website. You can look up reports from all of our fellows. You can request to contact a fellow through our website as well, and we can connect you with Churchill Fellows if you find someone on a similar project or topic and you'd like to discuss something with them. That's all possible. So that's all I'm going to say for now, and I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who I have not yet worked out whether that is Joanne or Ian. So they're going to show themselves. So Joanne Lane is our first speaker, and I'll do a very brief introduction for Joanne. Joanne is from New South Wales, the South Coast. She was awarded her Churchill Fellowship in 2018. It was actually the Yulgilbar Foundation Churchill Fellowship, so that's one of those sponsored fellowships I talked about. And her project was to investigate appropriate methods for introducing kelp farming and aquaculture into Australia. So as you could work out, Jo's a kelp harvester and supplier of Australian seaweed products for health. So really interesting. I'm going to stop talking and hand over to Jo.
Great. Thank you, Adam. And there we go. Good afternoon, everybody. And as Adam said, I'm coming to you from South Coast, New South Wales, which is part of the Yuin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. People often say that being a Churchill Fellow is life-changing, and I definitely would have to agree with this. My fellowship trip was a trip of a lifetime, which has shaped where I'm heading now and contributed to a greater clarity of issues that are really important to me. And as a result of my trip, I'm even more passionate than I was when I left. Ooh. How do I get to the next? Oh, there we go. Okay, so in 2015, I purchased a seaweed business, which is a little bit random, but that's what I was doing. And we hand harvest seaweed and make a range of seasonings. As I researched all the different possibilities and uses of kelp, which include agricultural feed, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, I soon realized it was physically impossible for me to collect enough kelp to pursue all these dreams and ideas that I had, and that it would be necessary to farm it. So after Google searching, I saw what was happening, obviously overseas, and thought I'll just find the people in Australia that are doing it and ask them how to do it. But I was surprised and shocked to learn that there are actually still no kelp farms in Australia. And that's when I learned about Churchill Fellowships and decided to apply. My vision was to learn as much as I could about kelp farming and bring that information back to develop a new sustainable and innovative industry for Australia. I travelled in 2019. Oh, here are some of the different uses of kelp. So fibre, even building materials, agricultural feed and biofuels. And yeah, we hand harvest and demand is increasing. So that's why I'm still driven to take on kelp farming. We left in 2019 and went to Korea, Scotland, Ireland, Faroe Islands, Norway, US and Canada, which was quite amazing. And one of the highlights was the initial ISS, International Seaweed Symposium. There is such a thing. 900 people from around the world came to Jeju, South Korea, and this is where we began the trip. So one of my tips would be, if there is a conference or a workshop around your particular area of study, try and work that into your trip, because it's a fantastic way to meet a lot of people in one place. And also in this instance, I didn't put Japan, Indonesia or China on my itinerary because of the language barrier, but which are big producers of seaweed, by the way. But going to Korea as part of a tour, it overcame that language barrier, because we were taken to processing facilities and we had an interpreter and were able to see some amazing things. So we got to see the kelp farms in Wando, and another highlight was the Faroe Islands, which initially wasn't even on my itinerary. I hadn't even heard of the Faroe Islands, but somebody recommended that this is one of the largest kelp farms in Europe. So we were able to go to this amazing place, be told all of this behind the scenes information about, you know, what size anchors to use, what type of rope. I mean, this industry isn't here in Australia, so getting that kind of information is invaluable. Another thing that I would recommend here is that the Faroe Islands was absolutely a beautiful place. We hired a Airbnb and we stayed for 5 nights. So after the conference and a fair bit of hectic pace, it was really nice just to stop and process that information and be able to recharge for a little while. So as Adam was saying, include a couple of rest days as part of your itinerary. As I was investigating kelp farming, one of the places that is a real hotspot for it is the East Coast USA, and Professor Charlie Yarish basically, or literally, did write the manual on how to farm kelp. So I watched all his YouTube videos. He basically was my hero, and so this was one of the biggest highlights of my trip, was to be able to meet, you know, this legend. And he generously gave up 2 hours of his time to give us a whole heap of information. But since returning, and now we're trying to breed kelp, I can send him photos of microscope slides and he will advise us. He's also been back to Sydney and we've been able to meet up with him and have lunch. So it's a really valuable getting those face-to-face meetings. And, you know, these people that you put up, you know, really high, you know, they're just really nice, genuine people. So something that was surprising or unexpected in my trip was when I went to Canada and met another kelp legend, Louis Droul. He showed up, he basically started kelp farming in Canada. He told me, make sure you go and meet this guy, Mike Graham. I'd never even heard of him. He wasn't on my radar. He's not a kelp farmer. He farms seaweed on land. And we happened to be going that way anyway, so I went. Louis said, so I'll do this, and it was really quite a highlight as well. So this Mike Graham's actually a kelp researcher, but decided to farm on land because the regulations in California are quite strict. And now this is kind of another avenue that we're trying to explore in Australia, because it's really quite a sustainable way of growing a food source for seaweed. So another tip, you know, as Adam said, you know, expect these interesting additions to your trip and be flexible enough to change your plans and have an open mind, which I didn't initially, but I'm really glad that I went to meet him because it did change some of my thinking. Since we've returned, we've been able to collaborate with some Australian researchers. So part of the problem, or one of the reasons we don't have any kelp farms in Australia, is because we don't fully understand the unique breeding cycle of our Australian species. and also the regulations around getting water. So we've been to Tasmania, met with people who've done their PhD, and we've built our own laboratory, and now we've had success with breeding baby kelp. So, you know, I'm still as passionate as ever. I'm really proud of my babies that we've been able to produce these baby kelp. You know, we're working through the paperwork side of getting some farms established. It hasn't all been fantastic since we left, since we returned. Actually, we had the bushfires and COVID, but there's a lot of positives as well. I've finished my report, so that's something I should touch on. You think about what your topic is and keep that front of mind as you're traveling, what sort of questions you want to answer and what your report might look like. Once you're a Churchill Fellow, it's a fantastic thing. You're part of an amazing group of passionate people from all walks of life, with all kinds of connections and people who also want to help you. Once we returned, there was an industry group set up to develop a national seaweed industry blueprint, and I was part of that, and some of the recommendations from my report are included in that. So that was really, you know, something that I'm proud of. We're also a member of the Marine Bioproducts Cooperative Research Centre, which recently received 280 million. So we're a state over 10 years to develop the marine industry in Australia. So lots of cool things are happening in this space, and I think being a Churchill Fellow certainly gives credibility, and yeah, so it's certainly a wonderful thing. So to prepare for your trip, do as much research as you can before you go. Get in touch with people that you want to visit, and then ask them to recommend, and who else do you think that I should talk to. Get an Uber app. You probably already got that, but that was very helpful to get around. Think about your report, and when you're meeting with people, I initially thought I'll just use my phone, but I did invest in a little microphone, which was a Zoom, and I found that incredibly valuable because we had, you know, sometimes you're in a coffee shop, having a specific microphone just had that better sound quality, and then you're able to replay that over and over and over if you do a lot of driving like I do, and that helps you to formulate your report. So yeah, my advice is just do it. It is a wonderful, amazing experience. At times, whatever your passion is, you may think, oh, it's very overwhelming. And I'll finish with one of my favorite Winston Churchill quotes. A pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity, and an optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. So anything is possible, and a Churchill Fellowship will change your life. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jo. That's really, I love watching you present on this because you're clearly passionate about it. I'd never thought about kelp or seaweed babies until I saw your interview for your Churchill Fellowship. So it always gives me a smile. And I guess perhaps there's something to do with seaweed and vinegar. I'm not sure, but I'll introduce Ian Henderson now. He's a Queenslander. He's awarded his fellowship in 2006, and at the time his project was to study vinegar manufacture from foods that were at the time in oversupply in Australia. So apples, pears, citrus, sugar, wine, grapes. Sounds like a perfect recipe to do some work to find alternative markets. And I think as the founder and principal vinegar maker at Australian Vinegar, Ian has a fantastic success story to tell. And I think a lot of that might emanate from his fellowship. So over to you, Ian.
All right, I'm going to make sure my technology works. There we go. I'm hoping I'm good. Look, I title this Vinegar is Awesome. Maybe you'll agree with me by the time we're done. I'm calling you from very cold and sunny Stanthorpe in Queensland. I thought I'd start by talking about me and what my life was like before I did a Churchill Fellowship. I started making vinegar before I was a fellow. I had a bit of lucky break. I got a phone call from a friend in America who had asked me if I'd make vinegar. I was a winemaker at the time. It sounded like fun. We had some surplus wine. I thought I'd give it a go. And I thought vinegar wasn't going to be that hard to make. I thought all I had to do was do all of those things I was told not to do in winemaking. So I thought if I just neglected wine, I would get vinegar. I was wrong. Vinegar is not made by neglecting wine. Wine is not made by neglecting grapes. Yogurt is not off milk. Salami is not rotten meat. These are carefully crafted, well-controlled, beautiful food products. They're not made accidentally. So that was the first mistake I made. And once I realized that I wasn't going to be able to learn this myself. I needed to learn from someone. I needed knowledge, I needed experience. And back in 2005 in Australia, there really was no vinegar industry other than some producers who were just making plain white vinegar. It was a very embryonic industry. And a friend of mine, a mentor of mine, said, you have to go to Europe. You've just got to see how it's done. You need to go and study vinegar. And I went, well, how am I going to do that? So I applied for a fellowship. I ended up going to Austria. And as Adam said, I actually did a formal course on vinegar making in Austria. I then got a chance to go to Italy and spend quite a bit of time in some very large and very small vinegar factories. I went to France to go and see some vinegar makers that I desperately wanted to see, but ended up being a bit arrogant, and one of them wouldn't let me in. And then on a whim, I ended up in Spain, and I'm so glad I did because I saw some of the largest vinegar producers in the world there. But yes, I spent my whole time 6 weeks in a rental car driving around Europe, most of it. So pre-Churchill Fellowship, I was married, had an IT degree. I was making vinegar the very old way in a barrel, and I was making about 100 litres a month in a good month. Prior to that, all of my vinegar knowledge came from a book called Das Allem Essig, which is written by Andreas Fischerau. He's an Austrian. The book was written in German. I downloaded it off the internet. I used Google to translate it, which in 2004 was not as good as it is today. I made a lot of mistakes from the book, but I also learned a lot. And I started communicating with Andreas and asking him lots of questions, seeing if he could help me. He told me he actually runs a vinegar technology course. And I went, if only I could do that course. How could I do this course? I didn't have the time, I didn't have the money, and I didn't have the reason, but I really was desperate for the knowledge. So I applied for and won a Churchill Fellowship. I'll go through my application process in a second. And the first thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to go and see Andreas. I wanted to do the course. So Andreas actually is part of the Austrian Chamber of Agriculture, which is our Department of Ag equivalent. So my first stop was Austria. This was my vinegar making moment. This is one of those amazing sliding door moments. I went into this class and I just wouldn't shut up. I was asking 100 questions. This is going wrong. This is going wrong. Why is this doing? Why is this smell? I don't understand it. My ferment died. I'm just firing off all this stuff to him. And he did this whole talk to the hand kind of movement. He goes, oh, hang on. And he went up to the whiteboard and he wrote that, C2H3O5 plus 8. He wrote that on the whiteboard. And I went, oh my God, there's an equation for this. Like, it all makes sense. My mind exploded in the first hour, and I ended up spending a week on this course. And by the end of the first week, I wanted to come home. I thought that I had learned everything I needed to know. I'm glad I didn't, because that was I just scratched the surface. Andreas taught me, or gave me, two things. I did a formal course. I have a qualification that's hanging on the wall. And I actually have some real chemistry knowledge. But the best thing he did was he introduced me to some people. So he's a very well-connected vinegar maker in Europe. He trains and teaches a lot of people, and he builds vinegar technology. That's some equipment from his factory. And so I got to meet the guy. He became my mentor. He picked up the phone and he just started phoning people around Europe and gave me those introductions into those people. So this is my fun fact. Since 2010, I actually translated Das Allem Essig into English, now that I understand the topic. And we actually published it since then in English, and I'm actually listed as the co-author. So he's still my friend. I go back and see him every couple of years. He's an amazing guy. Andreas told me to go to the Vinegar Expo, which was in Verona. That is actually a real growing olive tree that they stuck on the roof. It was amazing. And that was my moment that I realized that the vinegar industry is enormous, and it could be enormous. There's absolutely opportunity in Australia. I just thought vinegar was an obscure product. It's highly respected in Europe. I got an introduction to go see Marissa Barbieri. She's the head taster of the Aceto Traditional Balsamic of Modena. She is the most experienced vinegar maker. Back then, she was 78, spoke 4 languages, and was a truly amazing person. My wife came with me for this part of the trip, and she speaks Italian. So Marissa took us under her wings, and she just thought we were just the most wonderful people because we spoke Italian. She let me try her 300-year-old vinegar. She gave me the book of how they actually make it, the handwritten book, her knowledge. Because I went as a student, she was prepared to teach me. I wasn't going as a competitor or a customer or another supplier. I genuinely traveled as a student, and that gave me great credibility with people like her. Spain was just enormous. I couldn't believe how big it was. They do 4 million litres a year in a barrel. I was doing 1,000 litres a year. I then realised there is actually a business here. And this was my regret. I showed up at Martin Perret feeling a bit confident because everywhere I knocked, everyone let me in the door and they said, oh, you're a vinegar maker for Australia. Martin Perret was the first person I went to, and he's a legend in the industry, this guy. He actually wouldn't let me in because I didn't have an introduction. So follow your nose for some, but the ones you really want to see, you really do need to make an appointment to see. He probably would have let me in if I had have actually given him notice. Since then, so in 2007, I was making 1,200 litres a month. By the time I came back, I was making, I think the following year, I made 25,000 litres. Today, I've got 26 staff. We export, we supply Woolworths, Coles, Aldi, some of the largest food manufacturers in the world. My peers, the fellow vinegar makers in Australia, they call me for technical advice. When their machinery doesn't start or their ferments don't work, they call me, which is truly amazing. So they all existed before I went overseas, but I have knowledge they don't have. And my promise to the fellows was, if you grant me this knowledge, I will share it. And we are very generous in our time in helping other vinegar makers start businesses and also keep vinegar going. So, and that extended to COVID. You may not remember COVID, but in 2020, COVID, the epicenter was Modena and Milan, north of Italy. Most of the vinegar makers there were lights off. They weren't answering the phone. They weren't shipping vinegar. You couldn't get stuff out of Europe. And so vinegar was in very short supply in Australia. You just couldn't get it. The phone started ringing, the grocery stores, the big food manufacturers. I think this is probably one of the, we didn't realize that this was going to be one of the benefits of my fellowship was at a time when we needed a product and you couldn't get it from overseas. 10 years ago, I'd learned how to make it. So we instantly turned up production. We were working 2, sometimes 3 shifts a day. We went into deep lockdown inside the company. We kept the gates closed and the lights on, and we made vinegar. And so there's about 300 or 400 products on the grocery store shelves that have our vinegar in them, and we never missed a supply. So we kept hundreds of products on the shelf by replacing imported vinegar with product that we were able to make in Australia. And that's chutneys, pickles, sauces, mayonnaises, breads, burger sauces, all that kind of stuff. I've never been so proud to be a food manufacturer. And I think that I, again, should recognise the what the fellows invested in me. It came back to pay itself off in the last couple of years. My advice to fellows is put Churchill Fellow on your business card. You'd be surprised who you will run into who's a fellow. And my favourite story is I was at a trade show in the US about 10 or 12 years ago now. And I ran into Maggie Beer, and I figured I'd run into it at some point, but I didn't think it would be at a food show in the US. She grabbed my card, she disappeared. She came back with her husband about 5 minutes later. And her husband, Colin, is also a Churchill Fellow, but he did his back in the 70s. Colin brought me to Adelaide. He sat me down. He said, I know exactly who you are. You're me when I was your age. He says, I want to help you. I want you to make vinegar for me. I want to tell you everything I know. And he has been one of my personal mentors, and I could not be any more grateful for Colin. So fellows want to help. We want to help each other. We want to help you with application. We want to help you be a great fellow. It's the highlight of it is the people. And my parting advice is when you answer the questions, what's in it for you, what's in it for Australia, and what's in it for the world is how I'd frame it. It's okay for it to have a benefit for you. That is okay, but make sure it has a benefit for Australia and the rest of the world as well. There you go. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ian. Really appreciate that. That's fascinating. And sorry you didn't get to meet that person on your trip, but good advice there in terms of planning ahead. And thanks, Joe, again, for your presentation as well. So we've got 2 questions so far. First one is, Serena had a bit of trouble working out which sponsored fellowships are being offered in 2022. So we actually have, I will say, a pretty cool website, famous last words, I know, but if you go to churchilltrust.com.au/sponsors, that will take you to a page that lists all of our sponsors, and you'll see that you can select the year. So just use a little drop-down menu, choose 2022 and click on the apply filter, and that will show you all the 2022 sponsor fellowships. Additionally, if you start up an application form, you'll see them in the drop-down menus as well. So you can then go back and reference them on the website, but that's how you do that. Second question is, I've got a project that sits both in environmental and business. Is it possible to express both in the applications? I think from 2 perspectives, we have a bunch of categories for our fellowships, and really that the point is there. So professions, land, commerce and logistics, education, health and medicine, public service, the arts, community. That's to help us make sure that the right panels of selectors are assessing have the best chance of understanding a bit more in depth about your particular field. So in the case of your particular focus on environmental and business, I think you just select land, commerce and logistics. Now, again, like the sponsor fellowships, don't lose any sleep over this. We have people that manage our assessment process for us. They'll look at applications and think, actually, this is best, being assessed by this panel. So we're pretty good at sorting that out. And in terms of how you frame your application, yes, say this is something that is related to the environment and business. This is why it's a connection. Sell it as you need to. Serena, another question. My proposed question is around investigating barriers to entrepreneurship and writing or podcasting about it rather than being in a manufacturing area. So look, I think entrepreneurship, I think you could put that in the land, commerce and logistics or professions. I don't think it matters a great deal. If you had a particular focus on, health, the health area, you could put it in there. But I think probably, land, commerce and logistics or professions. But again, I wouldn't lose too much sleep about that. We'll make sure that you're assessed appropriately. And I think if you go to our website and search, you'll find there might be some interesting fellows that have looked at various aspects of entrepreneurship. Serena's question does raise a very good point that I wanted to share that I didn't earlier. So traditionally, when you do your Churchill Fellowship, you're expected to return and produce a report. As I said, they're all available on the website. Someone like Serena might actually produce a audio, could be a podcast style of report with maybe an executive summary to accompany it. So we are open, and I actually would actively encourage people to have the skills to create their reports in creative ways that are most likely to be interesting to their target audience. So Serena, if you do apply and you're successful and you want to do a podcast as the way of documenting your fellowship and your findings and etc., that's also perfectly acceptable. A few more questions are coming in. Elise, hello. Can the findings of your investigation be used in a collaborative capacity with an educational institution after you've completed it? Yeah, absolutely. So, once you come back and you've got your findings, more power to you if you can collaborate with other organizations or universities or community groups, whatever. That's your mission to go out there and implement and do more with your findings. You'll see my virtual background says impact funding. That's a new initiative we're currently piloting, and we're in the process now of accepting applications from Churchill Fellows who have returned to Australia. They've been trying to implement, some of their recommendations from their fellowship, and they can apply for some funding, where it's needed to help them with that implementation to try and help with impact. So that's something to consider as well that we're offering now. Next question is, how was the translator managed in South Korea? So might get you to put your camera on and answer this one. Thanks, Joe. Was it specified in the itinerary by day or by event, or was the host able to provide one, or was it arranged ahead of time? So you might want to explain how that worked.
Yeah, it was part of the conference, so the International Seaweed Symposium, and as part of that, there was a field trip. So it wasn't 900 people on the field trip, there was about 70 on the field trip, and we had, I think, maybe 5 or so, local tour guides taking us around, and the English was fantastic. So it was part of the conference that I had organised before I left.
So what I would add to that, in case it's relevant, is you might be planning to go to countries where you're going to need a translator, and you can put that in your application. We can provide some, fee. You can put it down as a fee request. I'd encourage people to travel to somewhere other than the US, the UK, and Canada, and New Zealand, which is, for obvious reasons, where most people go. But if you want to go to countries where English presents a bit of a challenge, because there's some really innovative or different things to explore there, we can assist with a translator as well. And we won't organise that for you. You will need to work that through, but we can give you some support. So someone says they've started the application but are having some issues finding where to log back in. Okay, good question. So just go back to the apply button on the website. The fellow portal is for people who've got their fellowship, and that's where they go in to access a whole bunch of boring things like forms, but also exciting things like apply for some of the leadership and other courses we offer, update their profiles on the website. So don't go to the portal. That's for Churchill Fellows. Just hit on that apply button again. This is the first time we've used this new form, so if we get a lot of feedback, we'll use it to help us make it easier for next time. So don't apologise to that one, Anonymous. Mia, is there any provision to bring a photographer or cinematographer along on the research trip? Yeah, look, there is. So we've had a couple of pretty cool videos, documentaries done. 2 different ways come to mind. The Trust actually has a prosumer camera and some radio mics and tripod and equipment, which we can loan out to people undertaking their fellowships. So if you have a look online, you'll find that there's a video that was produced by one of our fellows. His name's Tom Forrest. You can search that up. His videos on his profile, and he produced an amazing video looking at medicinal marijuana, and it was looks very professional. Another fellow from Tasmania, she actually organised through her own means a documentary crew or person to go with her and capture some footage, and came back and they put together a film as well. So there is, in terms of whether or not we could pay for that, I think it's probably not something that, paying for a camera crew to follow you around would be very, very expensive. So it probably wouldn't fall into what we could cover for the fellowship. However, we do have what we call dissemination assistance, and this is all the little layers of the Churchill onion that you can go through. So when you come back and you've written your report or your podcast, whatever, you can ask for dissemination assistance to help you, and that could be up to a couple of $1,000 to put together a video. And I think in the case, if you're thinking the video might be your report, we could perhaps look at using that available funds to help you create that video, if that makes sense. So thank you, and sorry, Tom Forrest, TOM for M money. All right, excellent. So that looks like all the questions we've got. Thank you for staying on board. If you're watching this, if you have any other questions, feel free to contact the Trust. If you're applying, I wish you the best of luck, and good night.